everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So I'm just going to carry on going over your comments. I am primarily still going over the comments from Empire of Normality. But before I get back to that, there's just one comment that I got recently on one of my comments videos that I just thought was interesting, and so I just wanted to go read out that comment first, just because it resonates a lot with me. Again, I'll carry on going over the comments from the Empire of Normality video. So this comment says, I was watching the new YouTube video of the talk Francesca Happe gave at Gresham College called Changes in the Concept of Autism, and was surprised by how much NDM, that's neurodiversity movement attitudes, were present in it, despite what I felt was her trying to be somewhat balanced. It led to some incoherent aspects, such as saying that autism itself doesn't cause any problems, which isn't the case in my own experience, but that only the comorbids do, whilst also saying that pure autism is very rare. If the vast majority of autistic people have comorbids, then clearly those comorbids are not totally separate from the autism. And the autism itself is contributing to the individual having them. And so going on about autism itself doesn't cause any problems is so disingenuous that it borders on the dishonest. Do researchers like Happe, who presumably work with moderate and high support needs autistics too, honestly believe what they state publicly? Or are they saying that because they are scared of backlash from the NDM? So yeah, thank you for the comment. Yeah, I agree. I've seen that video myself recently, and I did do a YouTube video some time back on the article Changes to the Concept of Autism, which the video Happe did was based on. And yeah, so I completely agree with what you're saying. I do wonder myself, indeed, whether these people really actually 100% hand on heart believe what they're saying, or whether they are saying it to be kind of politically correct, as it were, to kind of step in line because they worry that if they say anything veering off that line, that they'll get a backlash, because obviously the neurodiversity movement is an incredibly vocal lobby. And from my own personal experience as well, I really struggle to understand how autism itself doesn't cause problems. I mean, if you were to just have autism, like imagine a scenario where someone just has autism, so that's to say they meet the criteria for autism, but they don't have any other disorders. So in other words, they won't have a language, they won't have any problems with language, they'll be able to speak like I'm speaking now. So they don't have an intellectual disability, so they can, make sense of information and learn and all of those things. And maybe they don't have a mental health problem, they don't have any mental health problems, so no pathological anxiety, no depression, they wouldn't have any, maybe no dyspraxia. I mean, some motor difficulties are kind of often, I think in the Gilbert criteria, there are motor problems are actually listed, but nothing like over and above what you might see in autism itself. So no dyspraxia, no learning difficulties, so things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, none of that. No cognitive disabilities in any way. So just for pure autism symptoms, that's to say difficulties in social communication. That includes social interaction and social communication as all together now in one. And rigid and repetitive behaviours, interests and activities. They would have sensory difficulties, because now of course sensory difficulties are actually included as part of autism. They used not to be. So they still have sensory difficulties. over or undersensitive to the various senses. So they would just have that, pure autism. So Hape is saying if someone has like pure autism like that, nothing else going on, that doesn't pose a problem, that they would be able to maybe find a niche for themselves, to have a job. They might have a circle of friends around them. She said, admittedly, they might just monologue off about their interests, but they might have this circle of friends and they might be pretty okay and not held back at all. Now, to me, that is just totally naive. I mean, you'd have to have the traits of autism exceptionally mild and nothing else going on. You'd have to have those traits exceptionally mildly in order for that not to be a problem for you. Because if you look at the criteria, it actually says that these traits or symptoms have to cause significant impairment. Significant impairment. Not just impairment, significant impairment in multiple areas of life. So, work, social, family, personal functioning, all areas of life across multiple contexts, and it has to be significantly impairing. So by that definition, it's kind of actually not possible to be mildly autistic because you need to be significantly impaired. Obviously there are degrees of severity within those diagnosed, but to meet the threshold, there has to be some pretty significant problems going on in your life. And that's just autism. That's just autism. You don't need to have any other disorder, nothing else going on to complicate matters, and you're going to be experiencing significant difficulties to get over the threshold to be diagnosed. Because it's not enough just to have traits, you have to have significant impairment. Because lots of people might just have traits, that isn't enough. If someone has traits, but they're not causing them any problems at all, they won't get diagnosed. That's why that's in the criteria. And that's the case for all diagnostic and statistical manual disorders. All disorders have to be causing clinically significant impairment. That's a vital part of the criteria for someone to actually be diagnosed. And it's obviously it's up to clinicians' discretion. I know of some instances where someone doesn't because they always have a cut-off, don't they, where you have to meet a certain number of the symptoms. But I think I know for a fact that some clinicians use discretion where someone has slightly below the level of symptoms that needed, but the symptoms they do have are causing severe impairment. Sometimes they will still give a diagnosis in those cases because it seems to be the impairment is almost like one of the most important parts of the criteria as well. The extent to which this person is functionally disabled, essentially. And that's as it should be, because after all, the whole point of psychiatric diagnoses is that people get support. So what I'm trying to say is, I completely agree with you, but I don't quite know what was in Hape's head when she said that. I mean, if you just take the social and communication part of autism, that in and of itself is a real hindrance, because those symptoms of struggling to understand what someone else is thinking or feeling, to use social cues to navigate social situations, all of those, eye contact, facial expressions, body language, all of that is going to really impact someone, make it really hard for them to make friends, to form relationships. It can make them quite vulnerable in certain situations if they can't access help because they struggle to communicate, and all of those things. That could be a real disability. Autism in itself can cause significant problems. And that's pure autism, and as Hape said, pure autism is a vanishing rarity. So even if you had a hyperphysical situation, as I've just said, where someone does have pure autism and it can still cause them significant problems, obviously there are going to be exceptions to that, but in those cases they tend to be either extremely mild, in which case you might question why they got diagnosed in the first place, or the symptoms do cause them problems, but they're very fortunate because maybe they have an excellent scaffolding around them, which means at that point in time the symptoms don't pose an impairment. But if you removed the scaffolding, then the person would be very impaired. So you can imagine a situation where someone is clinically significantly impaired, but because their family or whatever is providing them with support and maybe is helping them so much that the person might not experience themselves at that point in time as impaired, but as soon as that scaffolding is removed, the impairment reveals itself. So there's that possibility. But, in each case, obviously that person is pretty privileged, or someone's got a lot of money, like wealth can actually, in a sense, act as a buffer against impairment in some ways. If someone's got a lot of wealth and a lot of money and a lot of support around them, again, it can give them this illusion of not being disabled. They are, it's just they're very fortunate and privileged that they've got this buffer around them, protecting them. So what I'm trying to say, my brain's gone. So yeah, but as Hape said, it's a vanishing rarity for someone just to have autism. It's a vanishing rarity because the vast majority of autistic people do have extras. And this suggests that autism is somehow related, maybe genetically. It might share similar biological causes with other disorders. There's a lot of overlap. There's a heavy overlap between autism and ADHD. People, they've suggested that they share similar genes. There's a heavy overlap between autism and OCD. Again, there's a lot of genetic relationship opportunity. There's even been a suggestion that autism and schizophrenia can be related. Obviously, that doesn't mean that all autistics are going to develop schizophrenia, because you've got to remember that autism is a really varied disorder and loads and loads of different genes are involved. But there seems to be a subset of autistic people who do seem to be vulnerable to schizophrenia and have lots of schizophrenia in their family, which again suggests that schizophrenia might be related to certain types of autism as well. There seems to be a connection between autism and pretty much every single psychiatric disorder under the sun, which shows that you can't really separate autism. You can't separate autism almost like in a vacuum and say, oh look, this is our lovely pure autism. You know, like that's basically like a theoretical conceit. It can exist. Some people do just have those symptoms, but it's really very it's not the rule of thumb. It can happen, and I've actually met some people who seem to just have pure autism, but it's not that common. And even in my case, I mean, yes, I do have OCD, and OCD is extremely disabling, and I would say, I mean, it's hard to say what's more disabling, the OCD and the autism, because they both interlink. But I do have OCD, and obviously that causes me a lot of problems in my life. But there was a time when I was growing up as a child when I didn't have OCD. It developed sort of late childhood. It didn't get as bad as it is now until my teenage years. So I spent most of my childhood with just autism. Admittedly, I did also have like some learning difficulties, but those I can't really separate those learning difficulties from my autism either. Some people say, oh, they're comorbids, but actually, autism in and of itself can contribute to learning difficulties, because if you're not actually really paying attention in class and other things like that, and the actual processing difficulties in autism in and of themselves can contribute to learning difficulties as well. So I don't really see them as separate, but I didn't have mental health problems until later. So for all purposes, you know, I had pure autism effectively when I was a child, and although I had a happy childhood and I wasn't in any way made unhappy by that, it did really impair me. And the only reason why I wasn't diagnosed until a lot later was because back in the 1990s, they didn't really have the awareness of autism that they have now. If you were a highly verbal autistic person, particularly if you were female, you were not diagnosed. Not back in the 1990s. You were only diagnosed in the 1990s if you had like a very classic presentation, sort of very aloof presentation. But if I was growing up now, I would have been diagnosed probably by the age of 8, because it was really pretty obvious. Like when you look back in retrospect, there's no way living hell I would have not got diagnosed by the age of 8 if I was growing up now. And that's just with pure autism, and that really did disable me. Even though I didn't feel impaired myself at that age, it was clear to others around me, teachers, parents, that there was something very, you know, it was obvious basically. Teachers noticed, I mean, nursery school noticed it, it was like obvious, loads of people noticed it, they just didn't name it because they didn't have a name back then. But yeah, all of that, you know, it's not exactly fun, is it? If you're growing up and you don't really know how to make friends and you can't really properly integrate, that is going to set you up for all sorts of problems, even if you don't experience it as an impairment yourself until later, mainly because I didn't really have the awareness at that age, which was good. Yeah, I mean, that was good in a sense because it didn't really bother me, but it bothered me later. It caught up with me. By the time I was a teenager, I became 100% aware of my difference, and that wasn't fun when awareness catches up. That is like, oh shit, that is not great. You know, Like, no teenager wants to be a loner without any friends, do they? I mean, that's not fun. And that's just autism causes that problem. Just autism. So to say autism doesn't cause any problems is just so 100% naive. And I'm really surprised that someone of happy standing could come out with that. Someone as intelligent as her could come out with that. I just don't get it. Anyway, I'm going to carry on. I need to move over to this next video now because this is actually going to run out of me. So I'm going to move over to the next video to carry over your comments. So moving on to the next video now.